A, B, C.
Off air, we were just watching some greatest hits of Nicolas Cage before we went in. So that's where we're at right now.
We needed to kill the time.
I mean, what was that movie he was in with the flaming motorcycle?
Ghost Rider.
Ghost Rider.
Ghost Rider. No, but
no one had
I forgot about his version of that. That was terrible too. That could be a whole nother topic. Favorite Nicolas Cage movies, but I don't think we should probably waste your 30 minutes that we have on that. So maybe we should get into talking about what we're going to talk about.
Would be ill-advised.
Hello, everyone. This is Trends with Benefits. This is our weekly roundtable podcast here from Digital Trends. Thanks for joining us. In addition to being a podcast, we're broadcasting live on Twitch, Periscope, YouTube, and Facebook. I think I got them all right. And today, we have kind of a special episode of this. In addition to having you guys all joining us, we've got a special guest that's going to be here with us. And we're kind of talking about the future of technology. We've got some things to talk about across the board. A phone that can smell. We may be covering that. We've got Jeff Bezos' moon base. We may talk about that here in a bit. But more importantly, we've got a really, really cool topic to talk about here at the beginning. And here at Digital Trends, we have a great article that just went up. I'm going to let the guy who wrote the article fully explain it to you. But it's about the future of computing and where we're at right now. And it's basically the idea of taking everything that you use on a computer and being able to easily transfer that from across devices to kind of sum it up generally. So say you're making a phone call on, obviously your phone, you can just quickly transfer that over to a laptop, for example, or to your computer or to an iPad and have all of them work seamlessly. And that's something that we haven't really seen yet, but it's something where when that happens, it's going to be a big moment in computing, just in technology in general. So we're going to be discussing that, but let's introduce our cast of characters here today. I'm Greg Nibler, and to my right, the author of the article I was talking about.
Hey guys, I'm Luke, and I'm the associate editor in computing here at DT.
Excellent. And
the Whiskey Mist.
The Whiskey Mist, a.k.a. Caleb Denison. Trond has no idea why you have that nickname. We shouldn't even explain it.
Nope. There's no explanation. It's just the Whiskey Mist. That's all it is.
He's the Whiskey Myth. And joining us via our special podcast computer here on the end, we have from Google our very special guest, Trond. And Trond, I'm going to attempt to pronounce your last name, but I forgot to check it beforehand. So tell me if I'm wrong. Wuellner?
Pretty good. I usually say Wuellner, but
okay.
I think you actually said it closer to the way it's supposed to be said.
Awesome. Okay, I'll count that as a success. So, Trond, thank you so much for joining us. And just for everybody who's listening, what's your position at Google?
Yeah, so I'm a product director in our Google hardware team, responsible for the category we call Create, which is our laptops and tablets with Pixelbook.
Fantastic. Well, let's get into talking about this article. And Luke, maybe you can explain what it is that you wrote and what we're talking about with this to everybody who's listening.
Yeah, I mean, the basic idea, it's kind of a big picture idea, but it's that in the next, I'm going to say 4 to 5 years, we're going to see, my prediction is that we're going to see a major shift in how we use computers, especially laptops and tablets and those kind of things. And the idea is that basically that we're going to see all the major companies who make these things pursuing what I call like a unified operating system, which is basically, you set it up well. It's just the idea that every device we use, doesn't really matter whether it's a phone or a laptop or whatever it is, it's all going to be running on the same operating system, the same software, the same apps, and it'll be kind of a more seamless experience than it is today. So that's kind of the general thing. And like I said, all the Google, Apple, Microsoft, they're all pursuing this idea, whether it's kind of behind closed doors or a little more out in the open. So so we use some of your talking points and what you've been talking about in regards to this, especially in regard to the Pixelbook. But I wanted to maybe set it up a little bit with kind of looking back at how smartphones completely changed how we viewed traditional desktop computers and how that really kind of shifted the landscape in terms of computing.
No, absolutely. With smartphones becoming such a central part of all of our lives, the relationship that we have as a result with technology is fundamentally different today than when most of the PC industry started. And as the first device you turn over and pick up in the morning frames a lot of the way that you think about the relationship that you have with the application experiences, the way that you engage with technology in general evolves right along with that. And increasingly, you're pointing out that there's sort of like a singular operating system notion, but really I think it's more of a unified user experience that we should expect, where we see the applications that you grow to love from one type of device more seamlessly interoperating with the other devices in your life, so that the experience itself transcends the hardware. And the operating systems that deliver that, I think, are more evolutions of where we are today than complete restarts on the concept of technology. So I think the sea change that we're seeing is more around the experience of applications crossing these sort of formerly sticky boundaries. And with things like Pixelbook, where we've brought the Android ecosystem right into the computing platform, the actual technology boundaries are going to dissolve as well.
Can you give us like an example of how this would work in a practical sense? Because I think sometimes this can be kind of hard to wrap your mind around, especially if you're not super familiar with all the different operating systems. Like what would this actually look like for somebody if, you know, all the kinks have been worked out and it was a seamless experience? Like what kind of how would that feel for the user in the end?
Sure, there's several, and I think the simplest one is actually from our friends in Cupertino, where you have iMessage on your phone and iMessage on your Mac, and when you get a message, it shows up in both places in a very natural, very simple, very easy to use way. And you know, behind the scenes, how that's done doesn't really matter to the user. And that same notion applies to Gmail or Calendar or any number of these different types of application experiences in a very simple way. So, you know, the idea of it sounds complicated, but the reality of it is increased simplicity in our lives.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest boundaries that I talk about in the piece is the problem with touch. And you know, there's fundamentally something different between using a laptop that was made for a mouse and a keyboard versus, you know, the mobile devices that we use that are all touch based. Like there's just fundamentally something different about using those devices, and that's kind of like a big hurdle that the industry is going to have to kind of get past, you know.
I totally agree. And the affordances that you need to build for the different form factors are really different today, right? Like when we started this journey of touch, really, like it really only started 10 years ago. And in that 10 years, the degree to which people expect to be able to touch and interact using our fingers on any surface that has a display has increased dramatically. I've got 2 kids, and if you show them a device that has a screen that they can't touch, they just don't get it. and they think it's broken. And in a lot of ways, that's just a signal of what we should expect, that touchability is really important. But I think we fall into this trap of assuming that touch is the right answer for every problem. And I noticed in the article that there was sort of like reading forward into like a fully touched keyboard in a laptop experience. And I'm not surprised to see a lot of people working on this. And of course, like every tech company is thinking about this future, but getting it right is going to be really, really hard.
I think you're right on that. Like getting rid of that actual, I mean, obviously I grew up with, you know, computers that I can touch, tactile, that feedback. I mean, which is why some people, even you see going back to like an old BlackBerry with like an actual, you know, touch keyboard, they miss that, having that kind of thing. That transition is, I would think, is going to be kind of a big obstacle. Obviously, you know, your kids, it's no big deal to them. They're going to grow up knowing this. But for the rest of us that don't have the extra, you know, 40 years, you know, it's going to be a bit more transition. And Caleb,
in the article, one of the examples that was brought up was Windows 8. Right, you know, they built it around a touchscreen interface. No matter what device you're using, you were touching. But that brought up, it didn't work exactly well, maybe because it was a little bit ahead of its time. But to me, I keep asking myself about the ergonomics of it, not just the feel, the haptic feedback, or the physical feedback that you get, but the ergonomics of it. There's something very different between having something that is flat that I can just lay my hands on top of versus something that I'm pointing at which is why even though, I mean, I dig my laptop. It has a touchscreen, interface, and I never use it. In fact, sometimes I forget I can do that. I accidentally touch it, and the next thing I know, I've scrolled down like 10 pages of my document, and I'm like scrambling to get back. But I never use it because it just doesn't. I don't want to. I don't want to do this. I'm okay kind of drawing with my finger on a device that's flat, or even for whatever reason holding something in my hand and double handing it. But what is it about having that screen that you poke at that people don't really like? And how do we get over that? How do we bridge that gap? Or is it really just old fogies like me who are like gonna have to get out of the way and let innovation happen regardless of how they feel about the device that they're using?
Right. Trond, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, there was a phrase coined years ago about gorilla arms, right? And the affordance of touching a screen that's vertically oriented is still tiring from an ergonomics perspective. It's not necessarily the first choice. The trackpad on the bottom is oftentimes actually a better choice for pointing in that model. But when you look at the devices that do have touch, we do see surprising utility in it for a lot of people. Though more of that leans into things like scrolling, like sitting back reading an article, and I wish I could just put my thumb in the right spot and sort of scrolling up like this.
It's working.
It's perfect.
Actually is a use case that people use way more than we ever expected. And I think it's being thoughtful about which use cases matter in that environment and not trying to map everything back to a touch affordance that doesn't have to be a touch affordance.
So where do you see this, how soon do you see this happening? If you could, I'm sure it's kind of hard to prognosticate this, but exactly, seeing how fast that we've gone just in the rapid development, just in the recent past, how long do you think before this is something that people would actually be using, like a unified operating system?
Well, I think we're seeing hints of it in everything we do already.
Yeah.
The more of the application experiences that rendezvous in the cloud, the more realistic the unified experience becomes. And every application developer today is thinking cloud first in terms of how they deliver an experience on multitudes of devices, because the reality of this world is that people live in a heterogeneous device environment. Very few people live in a perfect silo of one company's ecosystem. And the cloud is a very strong answer to how to overcome some of that, because you can deploy these experiences on many different devices in a smart way. And so when you look at examples like Gmail, like you get the same email. It shows up on your phone, it shows up on your Mac, it shows up on your Pixelbook. And the experience that we deliver is unified because of what it can do behind the scenes in the cloud. And that, I think, is a big driver of this, and we're seeing it everywhere.
Yeah, that was kind of one of the places where I end the article is not in the most positive light, because you kind of mentioned it, but you can get stuck in these. I mean, we think of these kind of walled off gardens as bad now, like switching from an Android phone to an iPhone or something can be kind of bad. You have all your purchases in one of the app stores, and there's a bunch of stuff that you just can't transition over. But if you had your entire life kind of in your laptop and your work laptop and your, the thing you take with you, your phone, and it was all integrated into one ecosystem, like trying to leave that would be a nightmare, and I think that's part of, I'm sure that's why companies like that, but it's also from the user perspective, that's a pretty kind of like scary thing. That's not necessarily what everybody wants,
Yeah, and there's a trade-off in every one of those situations, right? Companies oftentimes want to build defensible value that they can create for their users, and at the same time, when you can be thoughtful about every step of that user experience, you can often deliver a better experience. So 9 times out of 10, the thinking process is, how can we deliver the absolute best experience for our users by being thoughtful about the full set of devices in their lives? And sometimes that'll lead to trying to build better devices to complement each other. And sometimes that'll lead to making sure that we stitch and overcome the boundaries for our users.
It's a difficult thing to try to navigate, I'm sure, to try to make sure that everything works on everything. That's a very complicated problem. But, like your article says, Luke, once we get to that point, it is going to be like a watershed moment as far as it'll change how we operate in our lives, how we operate on everything once it's fully is seamless. And, it's interesting seeing some of it right now, like your comparison to Gmail. I mean, that is something that works across all devices, already. But seeing where we go is fascinating. And this article's at digitaltrends.com. Read Luke's article. It's really great. Just talking about the future of this. Trond, do you mind talking about some other topics with us for a minute?
Yeah, sure. Let's do it. Okay,
because I want to get your opinion as somebody who works, for Google, working on these future technologies. We have to talk about robots, and it's kind of a constant topic here on the show. But this is something that came up this week, and in Boston right now, there is a restaurant that just opened up where there's only going to be a couple of employees. If you're watching on video, I've got a video of it showing the interaction, and we've kind of had the idea that some of this was going to start happening, and we've seen little bits of this, but now it's a full restaurant where essentially they're basically talking about having one employee that brings you in, sets you up in front of a kiosk, you order your food, and they've got several different styles. I think it was Mediterranean, Asian, a couple other ones, Latin food, they said. And you can order these, and then robots in the back make them to perfection to this one chef's recipes. And then the employee grabs them and brings them right out to you, eliminating the whole idea of an actual chef back there cooking. You're just having somebody bring it to you. And it kind of, I don't know, how do you guys feel about that? How do you feel about that experience? You think that's a good thing overall, or is there something about having that actual chef back there cooking your food?
Well, we're kind of moving in the direction of having robots facilitate these kind of transactions already. You know, you walk into a McDonald's or, several other fast food restaurants where the order process is automated. Now, granted, that's not a robot in the traditional, pneumatic arms moving things around and doing things sense, but it is an automated interaction. The next natural step is to have a robot replace a human to do something that maybe doesn't take a lot of skill, or something that takes a tremendous amount of skill that a robot would just naturally get programmed to do better than a human. And I mean, one of those examples, I used to work on cruise ships, and they were just beginning to roll out robot cocktail makers on those ships, because you can just basically press a button, and all it does is it measures out proportions of something. Maybe it blends it, maybe it shakes it, whatever, dump it in a glass. Very simple operations that you easily program a robot to do.
Now I'm picturing like a robot with a fake hat, like, tell me about your problems today, Caleb.
And it's not. It's really just like this arm that's moving behind the scenes and doing all these things and then handing you a drink. And, first it's a novelty, but after that, it can get a little bit more manageable because, it can manage 8 different blenders at once, doing all these different drinks. It can move much faster. It can be the actual dispenser of the alcohol rather than grabbing a bottle. So, I mean, it's like integrated into the robot. It can do things that a human simply can't. And, it behooves them to make cocktails as fast as they can because they want to sell more of them. Well, if you move this along the food line, I don't know how I feel about it, because I feel like there's a lot of love and human touch in food, and that's what makes it really really good. That's what separates, the cookie cutter food chains from, the nicer restaurants where you go get something that's very customized, very bespoke, if you will, of a meal, because there's a lot of nuance there. There's a lot of things. For instance, like, how powerful is that garlic clove? Right? Some garlic is more powerful than another, and the amount that you put into a dish should vary based on the power, how powerful the clove is. Same with different herbs. Some are a little bit more fresh, and some aren't quite as fresh. There's something that the sense of smell and actual tasting as you're cooking something literally brings to the table. Right. You have to you have to test and whatnot. A robot can't do that. All it can do is execute some instructions. All the other variables that are there for food are gone. Now, robot service, like the robot bringing it to you, taking your order, bringing it to you, coordinating all these things, not forgetting that you said no cheese for this thing because it's incapable of forgetting that you're lactose intolerant. That I can get behind, but when it comes to actually making the food, no.
Well, I want to hear, Trond, what do you think about this? Working for one of the most forward-thinking companies on the planet, how do you guys manage that? Like, how would you, or would you personally, go to this restaurant, I guess?
Well, it kind of depends on the what I'm looking for, right?
Yeah.
There are moments in our lives when we're looking for transactional food items of consistent quality. And then we go to, a restaurant that has a standard operating procedure for exactly how many seconds you cook that beef before you take it off and put it on that toasted bun and hand it to the customer. And in a lot of ways, that SOP that's been written, who executes on that SOP probably doesn't change the outcome of the food product. But when I'm going to a restaurant, more often than not, what I'm looking for is that emotional connection or that story that I can tell about, eating at such and such restaurant in Barcelona with the amazing service and the unbelievably great jamón. But I think it's very contextual.
Yeah.
In a huge way. So I might go to it. It's a lot like buying something out of a vending machine at that point.
It is.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, although it's sitting down, I mean, it's like an expanded experience vending machine. That's actually kind of a good comparison for it because you pick out what it is, you get exactly that. There is something else that was just breaking before we went on, or at least that I saw. It sounds like there's up to 50,000 workers in Las Vegas who may go on. Their contract runs out tomorrow, and part of what they might go on strike for is the future of automation and protections against that. And this is a story, you can read it at Digital Trends, and I don't know all the details, but that was one of the things that they might go on strike about, is the elimination of some of the jobs with that. I mean, it's interesting. I think there is a balance somewhere in there of what can and can't be done and figuring out how all those pieces work. It's a complicated problem. I know we're running low on time, but you can read again about all that at Digital Trends. Let's get to a couple other topics here really quick because I want to end with talking about the moon. We did bring up smelling like garlic and smelling like the different sides of it. There's my tie-in. See, that's how you do it.
Segue.
Thank you. I just
Solid
want to call
segue,
that out.
Greg.
You always call out your segues. So it's a company from Germany who was working on this for smartphones, and it's basically how to get your phone to be able to smell and pick up scents. And they've got this way with their nanotechnology. You can read about part of how they're doing it, and they're calling it essentially smell detect, and giving their phones an electronic nose to be able to perceive different scents and generates a specific signal pattern for that. And they're talking about some of the different uses for it. It seems actually kind of interesting to me. One of them was to be able to tell if food has gone bad. That's actually one of their ideas of the uses for it. I think it's good. I think you could probably use it in some bad ways too. I don't know. I'm sure there's ways you can always manipulate technology. I mean, I'm thinking like band practice, figure out who it is that's smelling up the room. But there's different ways you could use this kind of stuff.
It's always the bass player.
It's always
It's always.
I'd say it's the drummer, but we can dispute that.
Said the bass player.
Exactly. But these are that kind of technology I think is pretty interesting as far as where we're going to go for that and integrating that into our stuff.
I mean, I feel like we've been talking about this kind of a device for maybe 4 or 5 years now.
Yeah.
Specifically something that could detect, certain bacteria to indicate whether the food was going bad or, had a problem. To me, this is backwards, though. I don't need my device to smell. I need my device to help me smell. So, like the smell-o-vision principle, right? Mm-hmm. I would love to be able to enrich an entertainment experience by having something be able to produce the smell. But, I mean, as long as they're working on it, I think they should come up with some practical applications for it first that go beyond just telling if your food is bad. Because, I mean, just check with our managing editor, Nick Moke. His read on when milk is bad is vastly different than anybody else's. And because of that guy's cast iron stomach, he can,
He's
he can
fine.
test
He
it.
can
So you're
handle
going to have to calibrate these devices in such a way that they're very safe
for individual use.
It's nascent technology. I'm sure it's all very interesting for the people who develop it. But as the constant naysayer of this group, I got to say, why?
Trond, how do you feel working on your projects about phones that smell?
Well, I don't know about if I've got direct applicability to my projects. Beyond the smell-o-vision use case, the notion of having a detector or a sensor that can identify sort of the makeup of the ambient chemical environment that you're in, and whether you can use that to detect, are you in a place with unsafe air quality? Or if you can crowdsource better air quality measures for a city and help use that information to improve the air quality or identify trends that you couldn't otherwise notice. I think there's a lot of interesting applications of the technology that have to come well before there's any very obvious consumer use case.
Figure out what the use would be first. Yeah, as far as doing something like that. Like, I like that idea as far as air quality. That's actually a really good point.
Yeah.
The worst.
I don't know about on the phone, though. I don't understand why you need to have that on your phone.
I'll tell you why. Because sometimes I'm walking around this office and somebody's lunch. I smell somebody's lunch, and I'm like, what is that foul lunch you're eating? And I'm not going to ask them that. I'm gonna just pull out my thing and go, oh, okay, it's that really bad baba ganoush thing.
You're talking about figuring out who cooked fish in the office.
I thought you were going to say nice. Like, oh, what's that smell? Like,
no,
what did you cook? What's for lunch?
You clearly haven't done this podcast with me very often.
It's like, why do I have this sore throat? And it's like, oh, that's because you've been walking around and the pollen count is super high right now.
Yeah, that's true. That makes sense.
All right, we just have a couple of minutes left, and we want to, before we have to wrap up, but I have to bring up the moon thing with Jeff Bezos, in particular, talking about how we have Elon Musk wanting to set up shop on Mars, essentially. Jeff Bezos from Blue Origin is saying we need to set up a moon base sooner than later. We don't have a lot of time to discuss how he would do that. I mean, I'm sure he'll probably figure out some way. My question is, would you want to live on the moon in Jeff Bezos' colony? Caleb?
Okay, we'll start with me. Absolutely. I love the idea. I want to go live on the moon. Sounds great. I'll pick the moon before Mars because the moon is much closer, right?
Yep.
So if I get there and I'm like, man, the moon sucks, I can turn around and get back to the Earth without wasting half my life doing it.
Okay. Luke?
No, I'd much rather live in Mars. Just go all the way in.
Okay.
And just go for that next colony. I feel like there's more going there.
Okay. Trond?
Look, as of last week, there are only 3 remaining humans who have stood on the moon. Like, let's go back to the moon.
Amen to that. We need to go back to the moon for a colony or otherwise. What about you, Greg?
I will live on the moon. I'll live on the moon before Mars.
Dude, we could be like moon mates.
Oh, there we go. Future moon mates. Yeah, we will have it all worked out. Well, somebody needs to coin that and market that term right away.
I just did.
Yeah, okay. Patent pending. All right. Well, Trond, I want to say thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. This has been fascinating. You're awesome, sir. Where can people find out? Where should people follow you? Find out more about what you're doing?
Well, you can follow me at Trond W on Twitter, and that's usually my handle in most places. Otherwise, go to store.google.com and check out the Pixelbook. It's a great product.
Fantastic. All right. Well, so you can check that out there. Luke, again, thanks so much for joining too. And your article's up at Digital Trends.
Yep.
So everybody go check that out. Send us an email, podcast@digitaltrends.com. Again, thanks for joining us. Hit subscribe for the podcast. Make sure you get it every week. And thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next week with another episode.
Hard stop.